Hey there and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire and I'm glad you stopped by today. So lately I've done a lot of videos on die cutting. I've shared tips for die cutting, for mass producing, for assembling die cut cards and more. Well, today I thought I would share two really fun ways to ink your die cuts to add the look of dimension and interest to them. This is a great way to step up your cards that have a lot of die cutting, and they're fun to do. Super easy. So I'll demonstrate the two ways and lots of different examples along the way. The best part about today's video is you could use any dies for this, so any die cuts that you may have. And I'll be doing inking with a couple basic tools that you may have, but I'll make other suggestions too. You could also use any inks you may have on hand. Okay, let's get started with this example. I chose to do this die cut easel card because it has a lot of die cuts on it, so it allows me to demonstrate the technique quite a bit. But remember, you can try this out with whatever dies you have. Okay, I'll be using for this card the Fern and Daisy pop-up easel die set that you see there on the right. It's from Poppy Stamps. Later in this video, we'll use the woven basket pop-up easel die set that's on the left. What I like about these easel die cut sets is you can create a die cut easel card very easily, but there are also lots of dies included in the set that can be used on other projects, or you can use the dies to make a traditional folded card. If you like this style card, I do have another video I did in the winter of die cut easel cards, and I'll link to it at the top right here so you can check that out too. But the fun thing about these two particular sets is they're something that you can stretch and use all year long. Okay, the first technique for adding color to my die cuts is very simple, and that is to use an inking tool to add the ink either towards the center or the edges of the die cuts. Now, that's a very simple technique, nothing fancy, right? But I have some tips to share with you along the way. The tool that I choose to ink my die cuts is the Tim Holtz Mini Ink Blending Tool. This is a tool that's been out for a very, very long time, but he used to have just these flat foam circle pieces for the inking tool. Well, recently he has come out with the domed foam, so you can see the difference. The new foam is on the left, the green one. The yellow is the traditional. I find this domed foam is a little bit sturdier, and it makes blending smoothly much easier. This is the original mini ink blending tool, and I'm glad that Tim now has come out with this rounded foam to go with it. So it's a perfect fit, works wonderfully, and that's what I'll use today. However, if you have the traditional ink blending foam, that will work too. These just are a bit easier to use, which I'll demonstrate. I'll be using Distress Oxide inks throughout this video because they're my favorite to blend with, but you can use whatever inks you prefer. Now, whenever I ink up some cardstock, I like to start off the cardstock and work my way on. That helps to make sure there's no harsh edges. Also, using this rounded dome foam is better for making sure you don't have harsh edges also. But why I really like the rounded domed foam is you can do a blended area in the center of your card very easily. You just start by lightly applying the ink and then start being a little more firm with your application, and it allows you to create that blending right in the middle very easily. So of all the different inking tools out there, I feel like the best one for inking the edge of intricate die cuts or small die cuts is an ink blending tool. Now, this rounded foam actually makes it even better, but you could use the traditional flat if that's what you have. And by the way, the original tool, the mini ink blending tool, works with the new rounded foam. You don't have to replace a tool. You can just buy a pack of the rounded foams and replace them on your tools if you want to. That's what I plan to do. But you can see here that it's easy to use this inking tool by starting off the die cut and moving on, or starting lightly on the die cut and moving off. And that gives you the option to just ink up the edges of the die cut for the look of dimension. You're going to see me do this a lot here, and I'll explain it more as I go. By the way, this little ink stand right here, that's called the ink stand, and it holds your ink pad and your lid so you don't have a mess on your desk. And so the ink pad doesn't move as you ink, and it is such a lifesaver. I bought these over on Etsy, and I'll provide a link below. Okay, so now here you can see I'm using the mini ink blending tool with the rounded foam to kind of dab color on the outside edge here. I just kind of go softly, and you end up not having those harsh round edges that you would get with the original foam. I also think it would be harder to use a blending brush here because as you kind of move around and circle the ink on, then you would mess up all those intricate die cuts sticking off. So by using this tool, I can dab ink to the edges, but use whatever tool and ink you have. The idea is to put a little bit of darker color around the outside edges. Now this is a cream colored cardstock, and I just added a little bit of scattered straw to the outside edge. For today's examples, I'm starting with light colored cardstock and adding darker color ink. I end up not using my light colored cardstocks much, so I thought this was a great way to use up some of those light color scraps, and add the look of dimension with a darker ink. So here you can see me putting some ink on the outside edge of this flower. Well, you can also put the ink on the center of the flower. So I've done both options there. For the center, you just dab the foam at the center. So you can add the look of dimension any way you want with the inking tool. Now I decided to add the color towards the center on this particular example, but I'll show you some other options later. Here's a small leaf where I just want to put a little bit of darker green on the edge. I found that was easy to do by kind of dabbing the inking tool on here. It would be more difficult for me to work that ink on with a blending brush in this example. And I don't have a lot of luck with the small brush blending brushes, but I know a lot of people do like those too. So the idea here is to put darker color ink on those outside edges or towards the center. So I assembled these first die cut pieces for that pop-up easel card. All of these dies are included in the set, and I just used basic light color cardstocks and added ink to them. Now I'm assembling the flowers, and these flowers are included in this die set also. So I'm using, as I mentioned, light color cardstocks. If I didn't add ink to these and I just layered them and put them together on a card, the card would be very bland and washed out just because there's such light color cardstocks and not much contrast. So by adding the contrast with the inked edges, you really make the card pop. So I added my layered flowers to the center, and I wanted some smaller cluster of leaves. So see over there, I die cut that background again, this time from green cardstock, inked up the edges, and then cut off some of the leaves that I could then tuck behind the flowers. So if you have large floral frame dies like this one, you can cut off those edges and use those as accents too. I also added a butterfly where I put a little peacock feathers on the outside edge, and then a sentiment right at the middle. Now remember, this is part of an easel die set, so I cut the large easel die, and I'm folding at the 2 score lines. So the die actually creates those score lines for you. So you fold one way, and the other you fold up, so you have this tiny little flap sticking up. We're going to put glue on that little flap, and then add our card front to it, and give it a few minutes to dry. Make sure you use a strong adhesive here, because you don't want this front part of the card to come off the easel. So here's a look at the completed card. All soft cardstocks that I added a little bit of contrast to using the ink and the ink blending tool. Now I did add some pearls here and there, some soft yellow pearls from Trinity Stamps. Now here's a look at the easel function of the card. So you can see what it looks like from the side. You just pull it up and it tucks right up against that sentiment that I added to the inside. I've done a few videos on easel cards. I'll link to 2 others. Actually, I'll do a playlist of my easel cards up here on the top right, so you can check those out. But basically, that sentiment strip is 2 layers of cardstock thick, so it's like a little stopper for the easel card when you stand it up. Now for the thank you, I used the Memory Box Thank You Posh script dies. I'm crazy about this style. I did the shadow from white cardstock and the thank you die cut itself from black glossy cardstock from Erin Lee Creative, which I'm addicted to and I'll use a lot in this video. Now for that sentiment, it's from the Concord and 9th Kids Are Grand stamp set. Now this is a stamp set meant for granddaughters and grandsons, but I like a lot of the sentiments and the dies that go with it for other folks too. So I like that You Make Me So Happy, but I wanted to just show you while I have this here, the die set that goes with this. It's got this layered trophy die, there's a layered star, a layered heart, a little banner die, and you can create some really fun cards with it. I encourage you to check this out on the Concord and 9th website. The examples they have are really great. But for this one, I just used the sentiment for the inside of the card. Okay, let's do the other easel card and then we'll move on to traditional cards after that. This again, I used my ink blending tool and Distress Oxide ink to add color, but I have some more ideas for you. Now look at that basket. You can see there's a texture to it, and that's really easy to do with this particular die, and there's many dies out there that do this. I have my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine. You could use whatever die cut machine you have. I have on my platform a metal adapter plate. Then I put my embossing mat. That's a flexible mat that allows you to emboss with a die instead of die cut with it. Off screen, I've already die cut the basket, and I'm laying the die cut onto the embossing mat, and then the die right on top of that. Those openings in the die will now make an impression on our die cut and add lots of texture. So here is a look at the die cut after we add that impression. Really cool effect. Well, this time I'm using my Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide ink and the ink blending tool with the rounded foam. And I'm lightly putting ink over those raised areas, and it really makes that embossed pattern pop. This is one of the times that using a ink blending tool like this is better than using a blending brush, because the blending brush would have gotten into the nooks and crannies and put ink everywhere. With this blending tool, I'm really getting ink mostly on the raised areas, making that texture really shine. The die set also creates a grass border to put in the basket, and this is another example of where this type of foam ink blending tool is a benefit over a blending brush, because I can put a lot of ink onto these intricate grass pieces, which would be harder to do with the blending brush because they would move around as you swirl the ink. So a lot of people were asking if I only use blending brushes now, and the answer is no. There are many cases where I prefer using the foam applicator, and now that there is a rounded foam available for the Tim Holtz tool itself, I will definitely be using them even more. And today I'm sharing lots of examples and where the foam is preferred. Okay, now for the flowers in the basket, I use the Memory Box Layered Fresh Flowers die set. Now it has a flower to make a big one, but I ended up making a smaller one for my basket. On my desk there, I also have two other layered flower dies from Memory Box. We have the Cosmos on the top right and the layered Daisies on the bottom. I ended up not using them, but wanted to mention since I showed them here. Okay, so now let's make that card. We have lots of inking to do. We did the basket. Here I'm doing the flowers. Now in this case, I added a little more. I added ink to the center by dabbing, but then I also added a bit of ink to the edge, just on that edge, to make it have a little definition. This is a good old-fashioned technique to do with Distress ink or Distress Oxide, and this is another one where using some sort of inking tool with foam is much better. You can't really get those edges like that by picking up the die cut and inking them with a blending brush. So this is another instance where using a foam tool is beneficial too. If you don't have a foam tool, another thing you can do is little foam makeup squares. Those work well too. Now again, I started with all light colors of cardstock. In fact, these yellow flowers started as just an ivory cardstock, and I'm adding all of the color and contrast with my ink. Now I mentioned you could use the other inks for this. You could definitely use distress ink, dye inks, pigment inks, but I really, again, find that oxide inks are the best for blending. Makes it a lot easier. Okay, so now that I have all my inked flowers, I can assemble all the pieces. I just use a little bit of Gina K Connect liquid adhesive there in the center, and then we'll add more glue behind this when we add it to the card. At this point, I thought I would be using some of those large flowers in the basket, but I decided not to, so I'll just hold on to those for a future card. Now we can assemble our basket. I thought I'd layer 2 grass pieces together, and then we'll glue that into the back of our basket, so that kind of sticks up there. I did put it high so that the grass would stick up pretty high, and then I would have room to add some flowers in the basket also. Now Memory Box also came out with some like bunny dies and Easter eggs that would be fun to put in the basket, but I decided to go with flowers so that it's not limited to like an Easter card. You could even use this basket with maybe some holiday greenery for the winter. Really, you could do a lot of things with the basket year-round. So after I assembled all of my pieces, I'm putting glue on the back of them and then adding them to the easel card front. Since I only put little bits of adhesive on each of the die cuts as I assembled them, I'm putting more on the back of it when we add it to our card so I can be sure everyone will stay in place. I like to touch each of the die cuts after to make sure that it feels secure. If not, I'll just squeeze a little bit of liquid adhesive behind the die cuts to be sure they stay. Okay, now we can create the easel die cut. This die again is included in the set. I just fold along the 2 score lines, put adhesive on that little flap sticking up, and add the card front to it. After giving it a few minutes to dry, our card is done. Now you could add a little stopper on the inside like I did on the last card. On this one I decided to skip it. I did add a few yellow pearls from Trinity Stamps here and there, and also a hello die cut from Memory Box glitter cardstock and a hello die, which I'll show you later in this video. You could make this an Easter theme, but again I decided to make it just a general spring card so it can be used for other things. I like how I was able to start with light colored cardstock and add the look of dimension and a lot of interest by doing a bit of ink blending. And by the way, again, this is a die set meant to make an easel card. If you don't have a die set like that, I do have a video on how to make your own easel cards using what you have. And again, it's linked on the top right. Okay, let's do another example of showing how adding ink to die cuts can really make a big difference, especially with layered die cuts. For this, I'm using the Birch Press Petal Egg layered die set, but any layering die set would work. I find it best to ink each layer and then put them together. So once again, I'm using the rounded foam on the ink blending tool and putting ink towards the outside edge only. This allows it to kind of have this lighter highlight at the center. I am also again starting with lighter color cardstocks. I did the same with the other 2 layers of the egg, just using whatever color ink matched the cardstock. So I used Wilted Violet, Blueprint Sketch, and Peacock Feathers. And look how pretty that looks layered together. Now when you put this on white, you have this beautiful contrast with the darker ink around the edge and kind of a lighter highlight in the middle. Now if we didn't do inking, let's look at the back of the dies. It's just a pretty simple looking layered image, but by adding that ink to the edge, it really makes it stand out. Another option would be to start with white cardstock for all 3 layers, add a light amount of ink over the entire layer, and then just darker on the outside edge. So if you don't have a lot of colors of cardstock, you could always just do white and add the ink. So I glued those layers together, and then I glued that onto a piece of like a light blue glitter cardstock from Memory Box. After I glued it on there, I'll just take my scissors and cut around the outside edge. And this was a fast way to put a little bit of glitter in the openings of the egg. And by the way, the reason I use the Memory Box glitter paper pads so much is there are many different colors of glitter paper and they don't rub off, so you don't have a glitter mess. The rest of this card was very simple. For the white background, I used the Poppy Stamps Pinpoint half ring plate die. This is one that cuts the outside edge and then has a pierced pattern, a great way to add a little interest to a background. For the sentiment, I used the Memory Box Happy Easter Posh script die. I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock and glued it together for dimension. And all of that is added onto a pool colored note card that's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Here you can see the inking on the edge of the egg, also the glitter in the openings, and I added a few little gemstones here and there for a bit of sparkle. So this card really didn't take that long to put together. I just did all of the die cutting, a bit of inking, and then some assembling. This would work with any of your layering dies. Just ink up the edges of each layer and then put them together. I wanted to show one more example of that, and then we'll move on to the other ink coloring technique. And I will do this same die set with that technique later so you can see a difference. This is the Birch Press Field of Blooms layer plate die set. I really like layered background dies and I use them a lot for mass producing, and I thought this one would be great for the spring. In this case, I did each layer from a different color of light cardstock, and then I inked the edges with that same color but darker ink. So this is Rustic Wilderness. Again, I'm using that rounded foam so I can easily and very quickly add the darker ink just to the outside edge. You could do more contrast, use a lighter cardstock or even white, and ink with a darker ink on the edge. But I wanted to have a soft look. One layer I did the green, one layer I did the peach, and on the top layer I started with white cardstock and added scatter straws to the outside edge. Now when we put these together, look at that beautiful blended look. It's darker on the outside and you have that glow in the center. Now I decided instead of using that yellow on the top though, I liked it better with a clean white uninked die cut on the top. That allows the darker peach and the darker green on the edges to show a bit more. But you definitely could use that inked layer on the top if you prefer. Now I wanted again to have a little bit of glitter showing in those openings. You can see it on those tulips there. You could do glitter cardstock like I did last time, but here's another way. I took an additional die cut from the die that is the back layer, and I'm just temporarily taping it onto some dark coral cardstock. I'm using that die cut as a stencil, and I'm applying Gina K Glitter Glitz gel over it. Now this is the iridescent, so it'll just add some great sparkle to the darker color cardstock behind it. The reason I'm using this die cut as a stencil is it puts the glitter only in those open areas. I can put the rest of the glitter gel back into the jar. And then I can just take my layered die cuts and pop it on top of this once it's dry. So I gave that a bit of time to dry, and now I can glue my pink inked die cut on top, then the green, and then the white. This is just another way to use your layered dies. Layered dies have a higher price point because there's more metal included, so I really want to make sure we have a lot of ways to use them. Here's a look at the completed card. I just added that panel onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card and added a sentiment on top. I also added a few little yellow pearls right above the flowers, kind of to match the pierced pattern that top die cut has. Here you can see the darker inking on the outside edge and the lighter color in the middle. It creates kind of a highlight. It's much more noticeable in real life. Now the sentiment on there, I cut the shadow from white cardstock, and then I cut the Just a Note from black glossy cardstock so it'd stand out. That is the Memory Box Just a Note Posh script die set, which is going to be a favorite of mine this year. I like this sentiment because it can be used for absolutely any occasion. You can just add a stamped sentiment on the inside or a personal message to go with it. I have one more example of using your inking tool and inks to add the look of dimension to your die cuts. Then we'll move on to the next technique. But this one I really felt demonstrated the power of adding inks to die cuts. So I have 2 butterfly die sets here. Each has the shadow and then the more intricate to go on top. And there are 2 different sizes. Now for the more intricate butterfly die, I'm applying the ink to the edge as you've seen me do many times throughout this video. Again, starting with light cardstock. Now for the solid of the same, I'm putting the ink at the center. So now when I put them on top of each other, you have this really beautiful contrast, a really unique look. Now you could use 2 different colors of cardstock, but this again, super easy because I just have 2 die cuts of the same color. I'm just changing how they look based on where I add that extra ink. So here I have Blueprint Sketch, put the ink on the edges of the detailed butterfly, put the ink towards the center on the solid, and when I put them together, I have a beautiful layered look. Really makes a big difference over leaving the cardstock butterflies as cardstock alone. And I made a 3rd green butterfly. Very easy to do. For the rest of the card, I used the Memory Box Crystal Frame die set. I'm using the larger of the frames, but you can see the smaller one up at the top. It'd be great for sentiment. I did the frame from 2 stacked white die cuts, and then I inlaid in that Simon Says Stamp Fog cardstock, which is a light gray. So you'll see me pop in the gray pieces into the opening. By making the frame 2 white cardstocks thick, it has dimension. I just wanted to add some interest on the background of this for the butterflies to stand out on. So here's a look at the completed card. So on the background, I used that Pinpoint die that I showed you earlier. Then we have our crystal frame. I added the butterflies on top and then a hello die cut from black glossy cardstock. You can see the beautiful coloring on those butterflies and how it really makes them stand out. So with all my examples so far, I'm just sharing how you can easily transform die cuts by using ink and an inking tool, basic technique, but this next one is really fun to do and I encourage you to give this a try. The best part is you start with white die cuts, so you can use an inexpensive white cardstock, make a bunch of die cuts, then we're going to add lots of color, fun color, using ink and a brayer. Now I wanted to talk a moment about brayers, and I'll talk more about these in a video coming very soon. These are 2 new brayers from Tim Holtz. You can see the 2 black ones there. Now, there is a difference in brayers, and I'm learning this as I learn more about gel press. The Speedball one there on the left, that's tan, that's a super soft rubber brayer. The one on the right that has the red, that's a hard rubber. What I'm finding works best in general for all the different occasions where I want to use a brayer, I like a medium. And that's what the two black ones that are new from Tim Holtz are. They're not too hard, not too soft, just the right amount to really get a nice ink application. Now, I'll be using these with gel press in the future, but if you don't have a gel press, this is a fun technique that you can do with brayers. Any brayer would work. I just happen to like these new ones a lot. They also have feet so that they'll stand on your work surface and you can keep your area tidy, which has been a godsend for me. Again, I have a gel press video coming soon using inks and these brayers. But today I'm sharing with you how to use inks and brayers without a gel press. Super easy, really fun to do, super fast way to make colorful die cuts. I will say I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and only do 2 card examples, but I promise to dive deeper into this technique later on. Just wanted to show you the basics today. Off screen, I did a bunch of die cutting with white cardstock. Any white cardstock would work. Here are some of the different die sets that I used today. Now you can use any dies. Just cut whatever you have from white cardstock and just have fun adding color to them. I wanted to do kind of a floral bouquet. I've been wanting to do this for some time, and I found that these new memory box flower dies were perfect for that. So I took a mix of them, cut them all from white cardstock, and now we're going to ink them. Once again, I'm using Distress Oxide inks. This time I'm pressing the ink pads onto my glass media mat so that I can pick up the ink from there. You could do it directly from the ink pad, which I'll show you later, but this is such a fast and easy way to do this. Now I'm taking one of my brayers and I'm going back and forth through the different colors of ink and then going back and forth on my white die cuts. Notice I'm not taking much effort or time. This is something that you can do very quickly, and it doesn't give perfect inked results. It just gives a beautiful inked die cut with a lot of variation. You can use different colors. I tried to do greens and blues, so I have peacock feather, speckled egg, rustic wilderness, twisted citron, and mowed lawn. But you just kind of go back and forth through the different inks and bring that color onto your die cut. And look how quickly I'm able to add those colors. Now for the tops of these flowers, I thought I would just ink up my brayer directly from the ink pad. So I first went to the Kitsch Flamingo, the new light pink, beautiful. Then I wiped off my brayer and I went to the Abandoned Coral, and I just add a little bit of that brayered ink here and there onto those flowers. Then I wiped off my brayer again and I added a little bit of Wild Honey. So I'm not really covering the die cuts, just adding a bit of color here and there. There's something so fun and therapeutic about this. My lighting isn't great here because it was a bright, snowy day. I apologize for that. But there is a beautiful inked variation on these white die cuts that is just fun. Something freeing about doing this. You could also get a similar look using the ink, the brayer, and a gel press, but I wanted to show you how to do this without a gel press. By the way, you can use other inks for this. You could use pigment inks, you could use hybrid inks, and some dye inks will even work. So try what you have. It's a fun way to get more out of your brayer. So now I have all these inked die cuts, and I used the same dies to cut additional die cuts from white cardstock. I glued those behind the ink ones so they would have that dimension. I felt that helped to make each of the little flower pieces stand out when we cluster them together. Now I added these onto a note card along with the Poppy Stamps Double Diamond Lattice die. They actually have a regular lattice die that this layers nicely with, but I just cut this from white cardstock, added it to a white note card, and then added our flowers on top of that. You can see the fun different greens and pinks and oranges that we have on our die cuts that we quickly added with the brayer. So much fun to do. I also added some yellow pearls here and there, and a Just Because die cut. That's another sentiment that's fun because it works with many different occasions. Just write whatever additional sentiment you want on the inside. Now the Just Because, I cut the shadow from white cardstock once again, and then the Just Because word from black glossy so it would stand out against the background of the card. I have one more example for you, again using ink and a brayer to color some die cuts. This one I feel demonstrates it better as we do the process, so I wanted to be sure to include it. And it's again using that same die set from before. Once again, I'm starting with white die cuts and adding Distress Oxide ink with the brayer. So you can see how I'm just randomly going across this, not trying to get a blended look. You could if you wanted to, but I like to have that kind of gel press look without using the gel press. So I applied a bunch of different colors here, mostly Rustic Wilderness, Twisted Citron, and Mowed Lawn. Okay, now I came in with a little bit of blue, some peacock feathers, just to add some interest. Here I'm doing the same pinks. I have the Kitsch Flamingo, and then I added a little bit of Abandoned Coral and Wild Honey, but not too much. I wanted a soft look here. Now, notice all that ink on my work surface. You don't have to let that go to waste. What you can do is spray your work surface and then press another die cut in that, or a piece of cardstock, and save it as an inked background. So here I sprayed water onto it, and now I'm dipping another die cut in there. I'm not using this die cut today, I'm going to save it for later, but I wanted to show you don't have to let that ink go to waste. Okay, so then I did one more inked piece, that's the one on the left, where I just used solid white cardstock and applied a heavy layer of Abandoned Coral, Kitsch Flamingo, and Wild Honey. Now I'm gluing those layers together with the white die cut on top. Now I know I cover a lot of that inking, but I wanted to show you this was another way to take your white cardstock, add some interest with some inks, and enhance that layered look. In this case, I just added it onto a white note card. You can see I also added a few pink pearls here and there in the pattern. But look in those openings. You can see the different shades of green, the different shades of peach, and it really adds interest over using just solid colored cardstock. Kind of hard to see in the video, but in real life, it's a big difference. Now that thank you is black gloss cardstock once again, glued on top of two white die cuts, so it had some dimension. It would stand out against the background. And that is the Poppy Stamps Thank You Flourish die. So that was just a quick introduction on using ink and a brayer to quickly color white die cuts. I'll dive more into that later on, maybe how to do a smooth blend and also with the gel press. So stay tuned for that. I just wanted to kind of introduce it today. So those are just a couple fun ways to take your die cuts and really make them stand out on your card. I hope you'll try it. Easy to do, nothing fancy, but sometimes I forget about those things that you can do that have a great impact on the final result. If you're interested in the supplies I use, they are linked below in my YouTube description. I always have them there. You can also click at the top right to go to my blog, a lot more information there. And some related videos are in the middle if you're looking for more inspiration. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful week, and I'll be back very, very soon with another video.